So first, wanted to start off that we are currently on land that was managed and stewarded by the Sassoon, Patwin, and Karkin tribes. They manage this land as well as large parts of Solano County. So just taking a moment to kind of acknowledge that, realize that as we kind of move forward with the presentations. And with that,
And Sassoon means?
What does Sassoon mean?
People of the West Winds. People of the West Winds. So as we are here in Sassoon, I thought that was super cool to the indigenous peoples here. Great, thank you.
Cool.
John.
You'll
Turn it over. Thank you. Great. So, yeah, we'll just go ahead and get started. My name is Anne Freiwald, and
my name is Lydia Neilsen.
And we are accomplices in all kinds of things. We have a business called Vital Cycles. We do permaculture design and human ecology work. We're based out of Santa Cruz, but we work throughout the Bay Area and have a lovely partnership with Sustainable Solano. I have been involved with a lot of their work, so that's what we're going to talk about a bit today. A walk around that we did around looking really at flood mitigation and water storage for Sassoon, specifically in the resilient neighborhood areas. So we're going to walk through that and then just talk about what are things that we can do on an individual, neighborhood, and community level that can help us actually sink the water that is falling from the sky, that's coming out of our tubs, that's coming out of our laundry, to really keep the soil moist and ready for water when it comes. So, with no further ado, we will go ahead and get started. So, we're not super big PowerPoint people, so you might notice that. We might forget to continue on. We like to work with flip charts, but we thought, since we have a big screen.
So we were invited in April to come and do a walk around with Jonathan and some of the other folks from Sustainable Solano. And we started at the City Hall and we kind of walked up Civic Center Drive and all around across lots and then down Marina. And we just sort of really looked at the way the landscaping was installed here and where the houses were they low on their plots or were they high on their plots, and where was flood water going to come from and where was it going to go when it receded. And from that walk around, we put together some observations and some recommendations for what people can do on like a community or even individual scale, because it can be so intimidating to try to get like government agencies to come in and do things. So what can we do for ourselves?
Yeah, because it feels also so powerless. And I think when we started looking into Sassoon, we're like, well, wow, there are engineers working on the levees and the slough and managing the water that way. So maybe people feel like it's already being taken care of, right? Like they're being sort of protected and looked out for, maybe, and, right, working on an individual level is just a lot more empowering, and there's a lot more that we can do that we can model for also our neighbors and our family and our friends.
And a lot of the techniques that we're going to introduce you to or discuss further, they have all of these other benefits to them beyond just being able to sink water in the way that they enhance the soil and support the plant communities and everything. So it's really multi-stacked benefits for the ecosystem at large and the homeowner, who's going to save on water bills and save on air conditioning and different kinds of issues like that.
Great. Okay, so when we were doing the walk around, we, just from the work that we do, we pretty much are using these 4 ecological concepts, right? And some of these, maybe you're a gardener, maybe these aren't surprising, but with the communities that we work with, we find that these 4 are really basic, and a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings around them, right? So the first one seems obvious, or maybe not, but it's that dry soil cannot hold water, right? And so we were just on the way over here, coming from Benicia today, we were looking and we're like, it's so typical in California. At the beginning, right before the rainy season starts, we're parched. The soil is parched, it's dry, and so when the rains come, the rains are falling how fast out of the sky, the raindrops?
Raindrops can fall up to 30 kilometers per hour, so the impact on the earth is really quite intense and breaks apart a lot of the soil structure.
And so you'll see in this, you can just Google it, right? Like raindrops hitting dry earth, dry dirt. It's like little explosions. It's actually not going into the ground, and that's why there's a lot of flooding when the rains do start. We'll be right with you. When the rains do start, there's flooding because the earth is like, I don't have any space to hold that water, right? So how can we on a daily, regular basis, make it so that the earth around us and our communities and around our homes are able to actually take that rain when it does come.
Because you can just imagine that water falling on that dry, powdery soil. Instead of soaking it, it's just carrying the soil away. So we're really contributing to erosion, moving pollutants around into open surface water, and not actually getting anything into the earth.
Yeah. Did you have a question?
I was suggesting you could use the analogy, if anybody's had a big spill on their counter and they grab a dry sponge, it's real hard to rip it up. If they get the sponge wet real quick and wring it out,
Yeah.
it's damp, then it picks up the water. So you could,
Beautiful.
that would be a visual for them to remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. Yeah, dry sponge does not, and dry soil does not. And actually, there's a gal, Dee Pursehouse. Is anybody familiar with her? She does a great demo that we couldn't really do here today, but she just says, here's how it is with dry soil and moist soil. And she has a plate of flour, just powdered flour, and then she has a sponge.
Pieces of
Oh, no, she has a bread. She has a bread, sorry, that will act like a sponge, and then she pours water over them. And over the flour, the water just runs away and takes some of the flour with it, but on the piece of bread, it soaks in.
Yeah.
So what we're wanting to do is create that anywhere we can,
Yeah.
actually.
So transforming our soil from that dry, dead powder with no water in it, no airspace, and no life, into this lovely, open, textured material that can both receive water and then give it back up to plants when the plants are using their roots and
Right.
photosynthesizing.
Yeah, so we'll talk more about that in a second. So, do you want to go to the next one?
Sure, so following on that, moist soil is better able to moderate floods. Sorry, glasses problem. So that moist soil, because it already has some moisture in it, it's supporting life. It's got plant roots, it's got little
Air.
bacteria, it's got air, it's got all the different creatures that eat the bacteria. The whole soil food web is in there, holding those spaces open and moving through. So when rain falls on that kind of surface, it is just like falling on a sponge. It soaks right in, it's held in those little spaces. And so that moist, healthy soil both receives the water and soaks it in, but also doesn't pool and make that like mud,
Right, so
gross,
mud
squishy stuff.
isn't moist soil. Okay, so mud doesn't really have the air pockets, right? It might have a lot of other stuff, but so mud is not what we're talking about in this case. I mean, mud, yeah. So just to be clear on that. So, water. So the next one, water in the soil is essential for plant and soil microbiome health. That seems like
Pretty
a
obvious.
no-brainer and obvious, but again, we just need to say it. And the reason we're saying it right now too is for the top two, but because of the drought and because of fear of fire, there's a lot of hardscaping going on. There's a lot of people not watering their gardens. A lot of people ripping out their gardens because they're like, well, we can't water, right? And it's actually worse. It actually makes the conditions more likely to flood and more likely to not be healthy and support plant life. So again, we understand the whole fear of fire and what people are being told around clearing and hardscaping, and there's a place for that, and for fire, flood, and drought, we need to really take these ecological concepts to heart.
It's
Yes.
actually a question.
Oh,
My little book, Ruth Stout's classic from the 30s, How to Green Thumb Without Making Back, about, she said the 5 rules of gardening is mulch, 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 and mulch. So women have a really thick mulch help keep the moisture
Oh, yes.
in the soil.
And it also helps create this spongy texture
Yeah.
because the organisms come up, they get that organic matter, they bring it back down, they're protected.
So I was gonna like do my drip system a little bit more often to keep it moist, but if I have it mulch heavy enough, then I won't have to do the drip system.
exactly. And we talk a lot of, yes, exactly. We say it's a mulch, 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 mulch. We say organic matter, organic matter, organic matter, organic matter. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. I love that.
So for our fourth point, building on the previous three, plant and soil microbiome diversity determines soil health, right? So you need the water to get the plant and microbiome diversity, but then those are actually creating that structure and that texture, and that's how we create the soil carbon sponge. So the soil carbon sponge is this new phrase that's kind of gaining popularity, and it's just about getting the carbon in the soil via the organic matter and the plant roots. The plants are secreting carbon, the little organisms are in there, and they're eating it, and they are part carbon. And the carbon is what actually gives the soil the capacity to fluff and sponge up. So it gives it this springy texture, which allows it to have the pore spaces and all of that life-supporting capacity.
Did you know about the organic matter, the 1%?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so what's really cool, and we think quite empowering around for all of these, is that for an acre of land, right, we all need, so we're gonna go into the smaller amounts,
Right.
but for an acre of land, what we're hoping to do is increase the organic matter by 1%, right? So by 1%, and for every 1% per acre, the water holding capacity is 19 to 25,000 gallons more. Right, so just think about that. So we broke it down to like, okay, a square foot.
Right.
So square foot of dirt, soil, whatever, what does that 1% look like? It's about 5 pounds of organic matter. But then if you see those 3 cubic bags of soil or whatever, that's 25 pounds. So you're looking, it's pretty doable, right? And so you can be increasing your water holding capacity on your property or where you are just by increasing 1% of your organic matter or mulch. Yeah. Okay.
All right, so.
Go on. So this we love. So we love working up here. Sassoon is a fascinating town. I mean, the history. I've been looking at the history. I find such cool little facts and little tidbits. But what's very cool is just notice how it's the geographical and ecological location of Sassoon is at the top of the largest fully intact marsh ecosystem that we have in all of the United States, right? Like, to have there, everybody know that, right? I mean, every time we're driving here, we're like, there should just be signs. Sassoon City, home of, the largest intact marsh ecosystem in the United States, right? We should be fully loving this up and taking every advantage we can to, again, so that same marsh, it can be a buffer around floods, and and it's impacted by like the ocean, like sea level rise. So that's why we need to look at it from all places. So 3 of the things we're going to talk about right now, which is what you're going to be doing in your yards or your gardens, is how to optimize on-site water resources, using small earthworks, which we love and we'll talk more about, and plant communities. So that seems.
Plant communities, right?
That's what Okay, so we're going to go into those. So home and community scale nature-based strategies. You want to start with the water?
So first of all, just optimizing the water resources that you already have on your home, landscape, yard, etc. So, you have rain falling on your roof and you can direct that into the ground, and your gray water is really invaluable resource, because you're producing gray water year-round, right? When we're talking about rainwater, we only get that seasonally, but gray water we're making all the time, Load of laundry, close to 20 gallons, a full bath, 50 gallons. Showers, maybe, 15, depending on lots of things. But if you can get that water out onto your landscape, it's maintaining that soil moisture. So you're maintaining that capacity for the soil to have the spongy texture, and it's year-round availability. So it's easiest to just water trees with it, but there are ways to get it to distribute it so that you're watering more of your smaller landscape plants as well. But the value of keeping those street trees and the major landscape trees alive with the gray water is unbelievable because of the shade and the cooling. And they protect the ground, big trees up here shading the ground, keeping the surface temperature down, and supporting all of the other little plant communities underneath, as well as the birds, the insects, the other wildlife, and all that.
Right, and that year-round water, I'll be right with you, that the year-round water then, when the rains do come, if you've been watering with your gray water and you've had roof catchment, the soil on your home and around your home can actually store and is ready to receive. So, did you both have questions?
Yeah. Is it okay to use green water on your vegetable garden and stuff like that?
It's not recommended for, your lettuce, strawberries, little small things where the contact with the gray water and the part that you eat is likely. But for things like tomatoes, squash, beans, fruit trees, all of that is great because you're just watering the soil around the plant, and the fruit itself that you're eating is not coming into contact with it.
That's a great question. Yeah.
We have been, for the last couple of years, we have 5-gallon, those Home Depot buckets, the orange buckets.
Yeah.
The rinse water from the kitchen all goes in there. But it's heavy for her.
Right.
So now I'm thinking, I need to find some contractor because I'm tired of the shower water. Okay, we have resources for
Yes,
that.
this is a really great book, and we've got a picture that's a very nice.
I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've been to 2 gray water workshops and they were overwhelmingly complicated, so I tried to do it myself, but you gotta know what you're doing because I did it the wrong way and I flooded the neighbors' yard and they were very pissed off.
yeah, there's
So I'm gonna hire
someone.
someone to do it
Yeah.
right, but do you have any kind of a handout that lists what kind of soaps to use, for body, for shampoo, for dish soap?
Yeah,
What you need to look for to make sure it's,
yeah, that kind of information is in here, and mostly what you're looking for is no sodium, and then a lot of the surfactants that people put in soaps that help that release the dirt from the fibers. Those surfactants actually affect, the skins of certain insects and the waterproofing and water towels, feathers and things, so you want like no surfactants and no sodium. But yeah, that information is pretty easy to come by.
Trader Joe's has pretty good soaps. Doesn't it?
Yeah, around here we're so lucky because there are really a lot of organic and biodegradable options.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are just some pictures of the gray water.
Um,
Do you want, go ahead.
You did say the word rainwater twice. I really hope you're right that we're gonna get
And we're
rain.
gonna get rainwater, yes.
What's that?
We are gonna get rain.
The other day, it like drizzled in Santa Cruz, where we're from, for like 5 minutes, and I was talking to someone, I'm like, oh, it's raining, I was like,
Yeah.
no, it's not really raining, it's just,
And
it's a little cloud burst.
To put that rainwater catch underneath that downspout, they frown on us doing that.
Yep.
The county, I don't think they
Why?
want us to do that, but I'm thinking, I think I'm gonna start collecting every bit of that I possibly can. Because I never know now if
Yeah.
we're gonna get more rain.
It's nice to have, your little barrel full, but the best way is really to just get that water to go into the ground, not just flood across the driveway or flood across the
Right.
lawn into the street, but actually soak in, and so we're gonna get to that in a minute. But just to really spell out this laundry system right here on the
Yeah.
left,
Yeah.
from the washing machine drain hose, the water is going out into the landscape, and everywhere you see one of those blue arrows, there's a little outlet chamber with the pipe teeing into that and the water coming out there. And so those outlet chambers are in the mulch around the plants, and so it's just creating these wet spots that the roots come and find, and it's able to sustain them quite efficiently. So the deeper rooted plants will need no supplemental irrigation. Shallower rooted things do because they just can't reach that saturated soil. But you can be very effective in the way that you distribute it. It does take some know-how and some learning, but it's fun.
Sustainable Solano would know people in our town who would do it, now,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Don't you have a little list, Jonathan?
It's on our website, I don't have a list right now.
Great water is solid, yeah.
Yeah, so,
And the systems range from extremely complex to very simple. A great way to start is just to attach a garden hose onto the back of your washing machine.
That's what I did, and I flooded the neighbor's.
That's how you flood the neighbor's yard. Okay, well,
we can talk
some
afterwards,
earthworks.
we can
So
do a little
we'll get to that.
troubleshooting, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next one, just home community scale. So just use small earthworks. And so this is one of our favorite things that is so easy to do. Now, okay, maybe y'all don't like to dig. Get some strappy young folk out there, pay them a bit, get them to do it, or, ask around. Do we have a resource for that? Maybe the Brad Lancaster.
Yeah, this is a really, really powerful book, Rainwater Harvesting for Drylands and Beyond by Brad Lancaster. And he talks about the different kinds of earthworks that are applicable in what situations. So different climates, different slopes, different soil types. So he's got ideas in here for all of that and really nice diagrams. But we're going to really focus on infiltration basins and swales, which are the two techniques that we use the most often. And the key is just to give the water some place to be held for long enough for it to soak in, right? So that it's not just running away. It's like you can't drink if the water is just, flying past you. It has to sit still for a minute.
Yeah, so we'll show some pictures. We just go to pictures.
Yeah, go to
Let's do that. So these are some beautiful pictures. These are more large scale. I should have put a picture of my house, actually. But we use the swales and berms. So swales and berms are basically like a ditch and a...
Yeah, so you can see the swale is the trench here and the berm is the mound. And this is freshly made, and so the next step would be to plant on those berms.
Yeah, so you plant on the berms, and what's so lovely, so I'll just use the garden at my house, we have the swales are about 1.5 feet deep and about 2 feet wide, and they've been there now for 3 years. I barely have to water, especially the natives that are around there, because So the mulch, or the wood chips, are going 1.5 feet into the ground. So when it rains, the water goes in and then it goes out beyond, right? And it's gathering in the soil microbes that are super happy that there's extra water. So it's actually keeping the garden moist year-round. And so the native plants I have rarely need watering. Like peak summer, there might be some drip irrigation need, but it's really very, very effective way to save water and to just create more green around you. And the other thing we like to say, what do we call it? The moist soil moat.
Yeah.
The moist soil moat around your house. So if you can use swales and berms, that type of strategy around your home, right? So then having your roof water even go into there, not necessarily even into tanks,
Right.
creates a beautiful space around your home that will, hold more water, be more green, potential for that. And what we didn't, I don't think we mentioned it yet, all of these strategies are helping to reduce the temperature in your little microplants, right? If you do that on a community level, you really could have an impact on reducing the temperatures. We want to do that, again, for drought, for floods, but for fires.
Yeah.
Because hot air draws in heat, draws in fire, right? So that's another reason the hardscaping too much can be counteractive to what you're actually wanting to do. Yeah.
Can you build basins and swales in narrow garden strips?
It depends, but often yes. Yeah.
And how narrow? If you think.
Like if you had
3 feet?
Yeah, I mean, if you had a 3-foot wide garden strip, you could just dig a little round thing, and then, maybe I got a few plants, and then I got another little round basin, and maybe I got a few plants, so they're small basins. But, we fill ours with mulch most of the time. These larger scale ones for large volume runoff, you leave open, but in this kind of situation, the next step would be to fill those trenches with wood chips. And so it doesn't look like a trench, right? It looks like a path across the landscape. The water goes in there, the mulch keeps it cool, the mulch is mostly carbon, feeding the soil microbiome, bringing in all of that carbon to improve the texture. And so, you can end up making pathways that are actually these swales and infiltration basins, so that you're not having to have a path and an infiltration basin, and then you're using your space really efficiently.
Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
I can't picture it, but are you, in a small garden space, you're talking about like a little donut?
You could make a little donut, or you can just say, hey, everywhere that I've been walking, we can dig that out, 18 inches deep, 2 feet wide, fill it with wood chips. Now I have a wood chip path, looks almost identical to, a couple inches on top of dirt, right? But it's all infiltration area. And you can direct your downspouts to run and discharge into those pathway swales, and then all of that water stays on site, and you're feeding the soil really efficiently.
Yeah.
If you have very heavy clay soil like in Vallejo with that and it's flat, because they did tours, Solano did tours a couple years ago showing a lot of soil, but they were all hillsides, and so the berms catch it from going downhill. But I was wondering if it's flat and if you have heavy clay soil, like I got paths between my raised beds, wouldn't that clay hold on just about as well as a swale?
You still want to dig down into the clay, right, so that there's a reservoir to hold the water. But then what's amazing is when you put the wood chips in there and the little organisms start moving in and out from the clay to the wood chips, to the clay to the wood chips, they begin opening the pore space. And it takes 3 to 5 years, but the clay begins to transform. And you can get in your swale and dig and say, okay, here's where I put the wood chips, and then here's, wow, like a 6-inch transforming zone, and then here's my clay again, right? But this 6-inch transforming zone, you can actually see all of the holes that the little organisms are making. You can see plant roots colonizing in there, and little jumpies and creepy crawlies and all of that. So the benefit of the swales and the benefit of filling them with wood chips instead of gravel, which people do often, is that the wood chips feed the soil and help that transformation. So that over time, the soil is infiltrating more and more and more, as opposed to the gravel, which over time is getting clogged with sediment and infiltrating less and
And the
less.
gravel's hot. Yeah, it's hotter, right? It's warmer. The mulch is cooler. It's a more cooling effect, and it's feeding more organisms. Yes.
This is important. North Broadway, just short of Mini Drive, a lot of the tree guys, they dump wood chips on the street there. So you can go get free wood chips there.
Oh, good tip.
And I've called some of the tree service people, and they have a list of phone numbers. And they call me and say, okay, I got wood chips to dump in your yard.
Yeah.
So if you call the tree people, you can maybe get free wood chips.
Yeah. And get on those lists now, because when people start to hear about it, like now in Santa Cruz, it's kind of hard to get them to deliver because they've got so many people asking for it. So you want to be one of the first people in there as it's gaining in popularity in your community. Yeah.
Okay, so anything else you wanted to say about this? Maybe just,
But just notice these very large scale ones. I mean, this is community scale stuff that can happen, you know, when we walked around Sassoon, we saw various areas where there was enough space for something like this. And all of that water can be directed and stay and get into the ground and then support the plant community around it.
and really when we did it, we're going to be coming back to the walk around and just show like what we saw in relation to these in Sassoon, right? Because there's so much potential for flood mitigation and helping for drought and to really getting the water in. And then there's, you know, of course, the challenges with that
What's
as
the
well.
difference between an infiltration basin and a swale?
The swales are the more linear kind of trenches, and
Like
the
the swale is
basins
the-
can be,
They can just be a big round, yeah, like there, so there's a place in the garden that I work in, and it's like downhill from a road, so the water always just comes in and is causing erosion, right? So we wanted to just put an infiltration basin right there, so the water would just go in to the ground and not just not erode the slightly sloped garden. Yeah, does that make sense?
Sort of.
Okay, wish we had more pictures.
see, it can be, you know, just any shape, anywhere you have space, you can just dig it, and it can be anywhere between
Was
6
the reservoir
inches deep.
basically?
Yeah, it's just like a little
Yeah.
mini reservoir. 6 inches deep, 12 inches, 18 inches, you know, depending on how much water you're trying to get in.
Like the one on the lower right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty large scale.
This one?
Yeah. So in your backyard, you know, in your narrow strip, you're gonna maybe dig a basin the size of a 5-gallon bucket and fill it with wood chips.
Okay, and that will help, just
Yeah,
a little
yes.
that
bit.
will absolutely
That will help.
Interesting, okay.
You know, and you just think about, okay, where is a place where I have some, you know, maybe I have a concrete patio and water's coming off the concrete patio. Where can it go? Oh, I'll put a little mini basin here and a little mini basin here. Or here's the downspout from the roof. I get cooling here in the wintertime. What if I just extend this pipe and I put a little basin here and the pipes can be underground? You know, it doesn't have to be a lot of clutter on the surface. It can all be done underground. And yeah, it's really satisfying, actually. It's so fun.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so plant communities.
Yay!
So again, it seems so obvious, but what we are seeing with people that we work with in our communities, and you know, we don't live here in Sassoon or Solano County necessarily, but it's people really getting rid of plants. And people thinking that they really, or that they can only have succulents, right? Because that's fire safe.
Yeah.
So it's just incredibly important to plant communities, because what's starting to happen is our native butterflies are dying, our native songbirds are losing habitat, where our native bees don't have the flowers that they need, or the fruits for that, you know, any of that they need to survive. And again, plant communities, right? So it seems super easy, but just so as you're starting to think about, you know, I'm not going to just hold water. I'm going to hold water because I'm going to create the soil sponge, and then I'm going to plant my plants in my soil sponge. You're creating a complete cycle, right? It's quite beautiful. Yeah, get really into it. You can totally geek out on it.
And we really need to sort of back away from this aversion to leaves. Like, people are trying to get rid of their leaves all the time. You know, like, your leaves are only a problem if you have a lot of hardscaping, because then they look like a mess on your hardscaping. But leaves on your wood chips don't look a mess, or leaves in amongst other plants don't look a mess. And then just, you know, what Anne was saying about supporting the wildlife, like right now there's something like 40% of our insects worldwide are disappearing because of, you know, pesticides and habitat destruction and all this stuff. And many people are like, I don't really like insects anyway, what's the big deal? Insects are the bottom of this food web that's feeding the birds and all of these other organisms and stacking on up and up and up. And we need to have this massive diversity of insects on this planet in order to keep the rest of the planet chugging along in a good way. And so we need these complex plant communities so that you're not just getting only mosquitoes or only gnats or only midges, but you have these thousands and thousands of creatures that are all living together, and you don't ever get too many mosquitoes because you have all of the mosquito predators and etc. So just,
It's really about
the
balance.
network.
Yeah, network and the balance. Yeah.
What communities could do if someone doesn't want their leaves, you could have a network of people who do want mulch. So you might have a neighbor who's like low income and she went to go buy mulch. So instead of putting the leaves in the yard waste, asked if any of the neighbors Need mulch.
That's a great
And
idea.
then, you know, kind of slightly off topic, but there's ways to get the leaves to break down faster. You know, we mix up a backpack sprayer with some inoculants that are, you know, full of biodegrading bacteria, and we put a little fish emulsion in there and a little kelp, and you spray that on the leaves as they fall or when you're piling them up, and they break down much faster.
Is that true for oak leaves?
It helps oak leaves. I know they can be a real pain in the butt because
We
it
have
takes
a
so
whole lot of
long.
shade.
Magnolia.
And magnolia, avocado, yeah, there's
Yeah,
all
all
those,
those.
bamboo.
But that lactose serum too,
Yeah.
right, will help that all right
What will?
Well, we call it lactose serum. It's an inoculant that we make ourselves
Got it.
using rice and water, and then you add milk, and then you strain it out. And it's basically lactobacillus in a solution with some yeasts. And you add a little molasses, and then you can mix it in with any kind of,
Yeah.
you mix it in with any kind of,
Worm castings?
yes,
Yes.
yes. So it just enhances any kind of liquid feed. And when you spray it on stuff, like for a live plant, it's like a, you know, a probiotic rinse, and for dead organisms, it helps them break down. So it's very
It's really
simple
amazing.
and effective across the board.
Yeah, and you make it yourself. So we
Yeah.
could, if you want, maybe we should write this down. We could send Jonathan the recipe for that. And then I'll try it out. Now, you might have to contact us with questions. That has
Newsletter.
I don't have a pen or anything. Maybe Jonathan,
I got it.
taking note, thank you. So we'll send that out. The other thing around the plant communities that we can do is send some resources around fire-resistant plants and, you know, just plants that and native plants and that type of thing, right?
Yeah.
So these are just our beautiful plant communities in soil carbon sponge. And this is what we're going for, and we're just finding a lot of people are like, oh, that's messy. Like we get people who are like, oh, my yard is so messy, or oh, the leaves, and oh, the, let's reframe the
Yeah.
mess.
Real quick.
Yeah.
She was before me, but real quick. This is totally different than what I was, you know. You take out all the old grass, you put your irrigation and you turn it on and then you leave. That's all that I ever learned, you know. But now in our backyard, we're trying to grow stuff and everything, and we planted 6, one died, redwoods, because I'm over there, Cordelia, where the wind comes. And now I need to feed those redwoods, you know, because they're starting to turn. So it's totally different than the way we're raised, you know.
Yeah, and we're all being asked to really change the way we think about how we interact with the planet and to see ourselves as part of this ecosystem. We are nature. We're not like outside of it, and we're not in control of it. We're participating with it. And so there's an aesthetic shift, but it's so fun to be a part of this. And we had this whole beautiful monarch caterpillar experience this whole summer with our milkweed plants. And, you know, it was so much more captivating than I ever could have imagined to be watching these things. So you get engaged in this totally different way, and you see the life that's just burgeoning out of these tiny little things that you did in your yard.
So what was the more, like just at the top of your head, of the fire-resistant plant?
Fire-resistant plants. So the deciduous trees, they hold moisture, they don't have as many resins and other volatile oils that catch on fire. And if they're in nice moist soil, and so they're fully hydrated, then as the fire and the wind come up to them, instead of catching on fire, they actually steam. So they're actually reducing the temperature and creating a cooler buffer around your house instead of
And if you look at
the ones that lose their leaves.
yeah, they lose all the non-evergreen ones,
Yeah.
right? And if you look at,
Like your fruit trees?
Yeah,
yeah,
maples and,
yeah.
yeah.
And if you look at, just again, go Google it, you know, if you look at pictures after like the Paradise Fire and some of these fires that have gone through, you know, in Santa Cruz County, in our mountains, many of our friends lost their homes, and we go and see their home, and their home was completely melted to the ground, right? But there's ceanothus, there's madrone, there's the trees are still there,
Yeah,
right? Because they're holding the water, they didn't burn.
right,
But the houses made mostly petroleum products, right?
yeah. So
Yeah.
burnt house, intact trees in between the burnt house. So tell me now how the trees are catching the houses on fire. It's just not what's happening.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, yeah, what we mentioned, we have,
Oh, I know. But let's,
no, go ahead.
Well, just really quick, some cities need to encourage, Vallejo has these big waterwise workshops every spring, but they give away all these drought-tolerant plants that do all sun lovers. A lot of people have a lot of shade, so they need to push the dry shade plants, that's my
Yeah.
specialty. But another thing is is you could make a beautiful design. In my front yard, I was tired because I already done so much xeriscaping. I did a beautiful design with gravel, but to make sure to put bead cloth, a permeable cloth underneath the gravel. You can make a beautiful work of art with different colors of gravel, but just to make sure. And then I got reimbursed for all the materials because they have this Cash for Grass program
Yeah.
where they
Yeah,
reimburse
it's a great
you if you
program.
take out your lawn
Yeah.
and you know, put something else there.
We're not big fans of the gravel just because of the heat. It holds heat and then re-radiates it. We also don't love the weed fabric because the new weeds, when they establish on top of the weed fabric, their roots go in it and then you can't pull them out. So we really go for like full organic cardboard mulch with wood chips on top, and then you just plant so that they all fill in and they just take up the space and you don't end up with so much weed colonization. I see your face, I see you're suspicious of this information.
Well, no, it's really, again, this is
You can only
just,
do so much.
you can only do so much, right? So these are just suggestions on why we use what we use.
Small
And if
Yeah.
you know, we did a permaculture design course in Benicia, and we converted a huge front yard that was all lawn and clay. Oh, they didn't have gophers. No gopher wants to be in that soil that they had there. But yeah, we made it into like a little mini, not quite a food forest, but 2 berms that arched and were nice and symmetrical, and then did wood chips and swales, directed the roof catchment into the swales, and then planted the berms with fruit trees and some natives and wildflowers. So yeah, so that's another way. And again, that would be cool. They had the grass anyway, but still, so you're keeping it cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how do all these guiding ecological concepts and these strategies, you know, DIY, what you can be doing, what does this look like in Sassoon? Do most of you, are you living here in Sassoon, or where are you?
Or Fairfield.
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 Too soon.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vallejo.
Okay. Well, so what we wanted to do is we wanted to just kind of talk about what we saw when we went on this walkabout with Jonathan and Elena of Sustainable Solano. Because there's so much opportunity. Like, we look at something, oh my gosh, this is all the things we can do. And we're going to actually plug a book, a guide that Emily wrote and took part of, that y'all have as a resource, that go out and definitely look at their table. It's one of the best resources that we found on how communities can implement a lot of these strategies that we're talking about.
What table is that again?
It's,
The Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District.
yeah.
What?
The Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District.
Oh,
So right as you walk out the door.
what's the book?
I think.
We're going to,
Oh, you're gonna
I'm not sure about it in a
Yeah.
moment, yes.
Yeah, we have a slide.
We have a slide for it because oh my God, the artwork is beautiful. It's very accessible. So, so what we saw a lot of totally supports what you said. What's your name?
Robert?
Robert said about kind of frowning upon the roof catchment, right? It seemed like we were looking at places they either had no gutters at all on the houses, or if they did, they were being piped underground, like, but not into the earth, right?
Right.
Actually, probably
Out
into
to
the
the
sewage
street,
system or out to the street.
Or they were just dumping right at the foundation.
Right.
Right, and then there's like this yucky space, and nothing is growing there either because, right?
That's how all the new designs are.
They just dump it right there at the base of
Yeah.
the building. Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of piping out to the street or piping into some other pipe. But really, you can just direct that pipe into an infiltration basin or a swale, or even just a mulched area where that soil can receive the water. So we have on our map right here, the yellow dotted line is outlining the resilient neighborhood zone, which is determined by socioeconomic situation and flood vulnerability. So this is an area that really needs to be supported. Yeah.
I had a gutter question. If you do have the kind of gutter that is piped into the drain, is there a way that you can economically convert it without having the whole gutter folks come in for 5,000?
Yeah. We just cut the downspout right there above
You
where
cut
it
the
goes.
downspout and you put a P or a U, and then you catch it into a bucket.
Or
Or
you cut the downspout and you add a different pipe that takes it over to
That's
the
right.
infiltration basin to go into
And you
your
can get the
soil.
little kits. What are the kits?
Yeah,
called?
there's some
Like
super simple
Super
kits.
simple kits, do it yourself, and even people we've worked with who are renters, you know, you can do it really nice, so that if you have to move and the person who owns the house doesn't like it, you just put the old pipe back on there, right? So if that's you, so very, very easy
Can
and
you get
accessible
the
to do.
kit at Home Depot, or is it local
I don't-
green group that,
I don't know about Home Depot, but we can get the information to Jonathan, and I'm sure he can get it on the
Thank you,
Sustainable
Jonathan.
Solano website. Because yeah, there's really easy things for, making a hole in that downspout to direct it into a little rain barrel, or just cutting into the downspout and putting a whole nother
because
pipe
people
on
want
there.
to know what they can do, so that's something.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's something that,
Yeah.
that everyone can do, and that we
Yeah.
saw on our, so we walked, the area that we walked, we didn't actually walk this piece, most of this here, we got Lowe's up here,
Yeah,
we walked down
east
Civic
side.
Center to Lots and Alder,
Yeah,
this was Josiah Park, right? And then down here all the way to Marina.
yeah.
So Marina area is not part of the resilient neighborhood, but we left it in this picture because the potential here for community-based strategies being implemented are huge, and they're a great buffer zone for the rest of the resilient neighborhood piece. Okay, so we'll go into that. So
Just a quick word on vocabulary, because we're talking about infiltration basins and swales, but sometimes you'll hear things called bioswales or bioretention or biofiltration, and it's all very similar. There's nuances, there's some, more pipe in this one or just mulch in that one, and so it's easy to feel overwhelmed by that vocabulary. So the big point is that you're making a space for the water to sit long enough to flow in, and in the process it's getting filtered, so sediment gets filtered out by the mulch or by the plants, and pollutants get filtered out by the mulch and by the plants. So just to put that little chunk in there before we go and start talking about a little specifics.
and Jonathan, feel free to chime in, or if there's something you would like us to definitely
Pointing
focus
on
on.
just ask that you point at the monitor, not the computer.
What'd you say?
When you're pointing, just make sure to point up rather than.
She was using the arrow.
Oh, she's using the arrow.
Can you see it?
No.
Not
No.
the
You can't see the arrow?
It's really hard. Okay,
Never mind.
we'll use our
Yeah.
fingers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Civic Center, and then if you take that all the way to the top, we walked all the way up there, and then you see that open space. Do you see where there's currently nothing? It used to be a community food forest.
Oh, no, you mean this little strip below the mobile home?
Yeah, below the mobile home park. So all the way up, this is Civic Center. See, I'm so short. Civic Center.
Directly above.
And at the very top, you go to Lots runs across where it used to be a community food forest, and then above that is the mobile home park, the Seabreeze Mobile Home Park. Is everyone familiar with this? We find it super, we can find it now anywhere on Google Earth.
Yeah.
Like, you look at it, Sassoon has a very distinct shape to it. And then there's that massive, Marina Shopping Center.
Yeah.
I mean, we were there during COVID, but there was not a lot going on there. So
Yeah.
it's a really huge, almost 5-acre space
Yeah.
that when water falls on it,
Nothing can soak through.
nothing can soak through. And
Yeah.
most of that entire shopping center is slightly slanted, and it's running into drainage things that lead right to Seabreeze Mobile Home Park, right? Which is one of the most, what's the word to use? I mean, it's the socioeconomically not looking great. They're very,
Vulnerable.
vulnerable, thank
Yeah.
you, is the word I was looking for, a very vulnerable population. So again, as a community, even if you don't live in this mobile home park, we don't want it to go to the mobile home park. We want it to maybe go to some of the open spaces that can actually hold the water, right? So as community advocates, activists, educators, however you see yourself, these are some key places that you can be trying to work with Sustainable Solano, with the city, to get some different strategies implemented.
So some other things that we noticed in the parking lot and in the landscaping in general is that the landscape areas are all raised with concrete curbs around them, and then the streets and sidewalks are lower, so that there isn't any way for the water running off the streets and the sidewalks to get into the landscape. It's like isolated from the landscape, so the landscape has to be watered specifically with drip or spray, and all of that rain is just going into the storm drain system, and it's not going into the soil where the soil can be nourished and fed by it. So, and then in the various different parts of Sassoon, the different communities we looked at, we saw that there were some slightly more affluent looking areas where the houses were a little bit on a rise, and they had more landscape, and then there were places where the houses were closer together and lower, and so there was a distinct connection between the affluence of the neighborhood and how vulnerable it was, just from the way that it was constructed.
Exactly, so like the village apartments, correct? I mean, they're being retrofitted, is that correct?
They're being redeveloped.
They're being redeveloped, so if there is any advocacy that can happen to use this guidebook that we're going to keep plugging into the development, any retrofits in Sassoon City, all should be done with the idea of flood mitigation, maybe not so much fire and drought, right? So that's what we're looking for.
So when things are re-landscaped, that the landscapes be put lower than the sidewalks in the streets so that the water drains off into them. And that then those plants can be supported independent of an external watering system.
So all of those, when they're, for the village apartments, when they're being redeveloped, roof water catchment, right? Swales, bioswales, gray water. Huge complexes like that have such potential because they can all be doing that together. It can be a unified effort to get that gray water into the soil, and that's what all of us are going to be wanting to do.
Yeah.
So, and it's not untrue of the harbor, the village harbor. Victorian harbor.
Yeah.
So Victorian harbor, just looking, so the public housing flat, hardly any downspouts or downspouts that just kind of run anywhere, not planned out. The other ones, the houses are high up, right? They're high up, they've got grass. They had mostly downspouts, but again, we couldn't tell where they were going to, right? So that's cool because if it floods, they're a little higher up. So pretty much everything should maybe be a little bit higher up in this town, right? So that if there is even some flooding, just seasonal flooding, it's not going into people's homes and it's not having that kind of damage.
So this big rethink that we're inviting everybody to participate in, and that you alluded to, Robert, is that we have to stop thinking about how to get rid of our water using pipes and concrete and drains, and how to just absorb our water. We're moving into absorbing our water. And so the wording here is going from gray infrastructure to green infrastructure. So the green infrastructure is really about using nature to absorb the water, as opposed to the gray concrete-based infrastructure, which is just getting that water away as fast as possible. So when there are opportunities for the retrofits and things, when there's new development, that these green infrastructure practices can be implemented, then you have this whole nature-based solution happening, and you get all of this life and all of these secondary benefits instead of just putting another pressure on the drainage system.
Did you have a question?
I was going to say something I saw recently in Fairfield at the Donnell Center was a permeable driveway, a permeable parking lot.
Yeah,
And to me, that's just like, wow, that makes so much sense to
exactly.
have something permeable
Yeah.
as opposed to the concrete that just, like you say, how can it get into anything
Yeah,
if we're just treating it as waste?
yeah.
Yeah.
Because it's not waste, it's
Yeah.
a resource.
Yeah, we're wasting a resource.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, so the pervious pavement is a great way to go for new development,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it allows the water to move through, and those little spaces in the concrete actually get colonized by bacteria, so that it's actually filtering as it moves through the concrete. It's like, wow, concrete could be so much more than we really thought.
Yeah.
And then it absorbs underneath.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Talk about that. And so we just wanted to sort of throw in some numbers here too, right? So the little place that used to be the food forest, you can see that up there, just below the mobile home park. So that's just under 2 acres, right? And so I guess it is going to be developed, Jonathan. Is that?
There's an RFP for it right now.
And there's an RFP for it right now. So if there's any advocacy that can be done to actually have a food forest there, it would be great, because there's a lot of water that could be diverted in there, and there would hardly have to be any irrigation, right? I mean, there's actually just the way that whole neighborhood is formed would be so conducive to a beautiful community food forest, which is, again, what we need to be able to gather more water. Now, if you look at the parking area and the shopping center, that's about 5 acres. Right, so how many gallons of water in a 24-inch rain year, which, yes, let's all envision that or more. It's about 1.3 million gallons
Yeah.
Oh my
of
God.
water
Because one of
per
those
year.
gray rectangles has enough roof surface area to get about 630,000 gallons of water in that 24-inch rain year. So you have 7 or 8 of those buildings, you're looking at over $1 million, over a million gallons.
Over a million gallons
Of
that are
runoff.
just being run off and put into storm drains that could be being used in the soil. right? And being used to plant, to grow, to whatever, in any case, to be stored and not, as she had said, wasted.
Yeah.
Or just treated as a waste product. I mean, rain, so the gray water, you're reusing the water you've already paid for.
Yeah.
And of course, you've already used it slightly sometimes, hardly ever, right? The rainwater's free, right? And why not get? We need to be thinking the rainwater is free, and we just need to know what to do with it when it comes out, because we don't want 1 million gallons of water to seriously just be put into the marsh or the slough or wherever it goes when it goes down the drains.
So if you can imagine just taking out maybe 20% of the parking spaces and putting in infiltration basins in that parking area,
Right.
what is the difference to
If
that?
that shopping center could be greened up with what Lydia said, and then also some deciduous plants,
Big trees.
big trees
shade.
put in there, again, how hot, Jesus, sorry about that. How hot do you think that shopping center is? Like that little microclimate is hot and windy, and it's right by the freeway. It would reduce noise, it would reduce pollution, it would allow for water catchment, and would bring the temperature down, right? All the things that we want to do. So again, we're just throwing these out as ways you can advocate. If you hear about a town hall meeting with any of this going to be happening, then show up with some good information about why you think that this community that's not necessarily best for your community. So that would be lovely, to the bioswales, all the things that Lydia and I just said.
Yeah.
Now that big space,
The huge field.
the huge field, when we first got into this before the walk, I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. It's about 8 acres, and it's pretty empty, and there's a little seasonal creek that the Josiah Park, from the homeowners associations, it looks like water gets sort of piped down the streets to Josiah Park, and there's a little thing underneath, a pipe underneath that cuts out on that field.
Kind of at the edge of
You
the
can
field,
see
right
that little
behind the
green,
buildings.
the little green area right there. So again, that's okay, right? Why not? But again, that's all rainwater, roof catchment water that's just not being used. It's just being put on that field. So that field is going to be developed into storage units, right? So again, maybe.
So it is.
But how cool, what did you say?
It is.
It is.
Yeah.
So, and we don't know the people, and we don't know what sort of power of advocacy there is, but it couldn't hurt to be talking about pervious pavement, to be talking about raising it up, and so that you don't have so that's even 3 more acres, right? So that's like even more than 1 million gallons of water per year that is going to just get shunted away and put into the stormwater system here. So if that development, even if it is storage containers, what can be done there, right, to capture the water, store the water, use the water, and create soil where the water can come into. So we don't know the answers to that, but those are kind of our major things around those big areas at the top. The mobile home park, we're just going to wait a little while. I think if things can start to happen around the mobile home park, I think what would be so cool, we talked about this with Jonathan, is if it just could be that, you just have to do either the pervious pavement, the water catchment, the roof water catchment. The pervious pavement in the mobile home park would be great because they're getting all the water. Rather than have it pool up, if it could go into the ground, that would be amazing.
Because they don't have a lot of space for basins and swales and things
No.
like that.
No, it's pretty much paved, and it's hot, so again, that could cool it down, right? So do you want to say anything else any questions about any of these areas, or Jonathan, did you? No.
Yeah, doing great.
But the next place we went, that's not part of the resilient neighborhood, is this area, which is Marina, I believe, and this is the middle school. So much opportunity here. Did you have a question? Oh, you can't see it, sorry, you're doing it.
Yeah, there's the road. So this one's a pretty wide road. Could actually have
Huge.
roundabouts at some of the intersections that maybe had a bioswale or an infiltration basin in the center of the roundabout with some plantings, or part of that street area could be given up to a larger, longer bioswale. And then, we thought the middle school actually has a lot of opportunity because they actually have open space that they can work with the students even, to get more infiltration areas going on there. And then this community along here, these little heat holes, slough beds, they're really close to the water and potential overtopping of slough flooding, and so.
Isn't that where all that water is going? going? They're trying to ship it out there to that slough, to the
Yeah.
marsh, and
Yeah.
just dumping it out there?
But then when the slough is full, when
Well,
we have a
that's right.
king tide, when we've had a week of rain, and we've got sea level rise going
And that's gonna
on.
all potentially happen at the same time, because
Yeah.
we don't get, if we get 24 inches of rain, we don't get 24 inches over like 6 months. We can get 24 inches in 8 weeks, right? And that's at the same time when there's storms, right?
Right.
Obviously, it's a storm, things are rising, the tides are rising, so really wanting to prevent that. You know, we don't wanna be contributing millions of gallons,
Yeah.
right, a year.
If the
And that's
water,
just those two spaces,
yeah.
right?
If the rainwater is in the soil, it's not adding volume to the slough, right? So part of this whole sea level rise thing is like we're dehydrating our continents, and all of that water is now in the ocean. And it's significantly contributing. Let's get the water back into the land, and then we'll have less of it in the ocean. We're keeping our fresh where our plants need fresh. We're keeping the ocean cleaner, not so much runoff, pollution, sediment, all of that stuff. And so here on this scale, we keep it on our properties, we keep it on the land, we keep it out of the slough. Then the slough is only dealing with the actual sea level.
Only dealing with stuff.
Only that.
Great, so I think this is our last slide. We wanted to see if there were questions, but we had a lot of questions throughout. But do any of you have any questions specifically? Yeah.
What's the best mulch?
We really like just the wood chips that the tree companies have. They're usually local trees that were just chopped up, and they are really happy to give them to you nearby wherever they made them, so that
Are
they
they
don't have to
small
travel
enough?
them.
They are small enough,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I've had, in Santa Cruz, I will tell them, you know, I normally, if I have tree work done, I just have them grind up my stuff and leave them there for me, right? So my on-site resources are just kept there. But sometimes, like one time that they couldn't dump my chips, so I told them, I'm like, I want my chips because I know that they don't have pesticides, and I know how they've been, how the trees are treated, and they're like, got it. And so they know, so they tell me what I'm getting, they tell me where it came from, like the house it came from, and that they know, right? And so they're very kind. The tree people are happy to give away their mulch, as far as the experience I've had. So you had your hand, and then we'll go back to Robert.
Yeah, that's a very good thing, is because a lot of times that tree people don't say, unless you ask, what's the condition of the area of the tree that you got infected, and was it, you know, or this kind of thing. But I have a question about eucalyptus, because eucalyptus are, you know, that's toxic, and nothing grows with that. Is it good to use the eucalyptus in like the swells and stuff too? Is that okay? Or because it goes into the soil and goes into the...
But it also is getting broken down by the soil organisms. So
It's in the ground.
it transforms in a very short amount of time in the swale much more quickly than it would just as a surface mulch spread around. So in the swale you get this whole synchronicity of all the different forces at work.
Okay, yeah, because I have the eucalyptus trees, I was concerned whether I could use them. And I've been just putting out the leaves and all this stuff in the hauled off, because I was afraid to put it in my ground.
Yeah, I think, if you have sensitive plants, avoid mulching them with the eucalyptus leaves, but other established trees, or for putting them in the basins or for putting them in the trenches, it's totally fine. And that lactoserum inoculant that we mentioned in the beginning
And
also,
Jonathan's gonna put it in
also helps things break down more quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more word on mulches, like if you want a more aesthetic mulch, you can definitely buy wood chips from the landscape supply places. Some people still think they're too sharp or whatever, so often we'll fill a swale with 12 inches of wood chips from the tree company, and then you top it with 3 or 4 inches of mini bark, that's pretty, so it's real soft on the feet and has the aesthetic that we do.
So we have a tree that we're going to be taking out that is diseased. Can we put it into mulch and put it deep in the soil?
I think so, you think so, yes.
You think that's okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Great. Any other questions?
I just want to get a picture of that, of those 2 books that
Yeah, and then we showed a picture of the,
Oh, yeah, okay, and they gotta leave, but we do, so this is right outside, there's our table, we're so excited to meet her.
Oh, wow.
This is one of the best, well-written design guidebook, and it brings in the Green Stormwater Infrastructure Plan for Solano County. were so impressed. We do a lot of permaculture and it has all of those guiding principles in them.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.